All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you about the enzyme lab and what the expectations are. First off, I want you to know that the due date will obviously be pushed back, so we'll need to work on it for a little bit more in class and to give each other some revisions or some feedback for our conclusions before we turn anything in. So it'll be due after the Thanksgiving break that's occurring next week. There are a few things that we need to definitely talk about. So if we look at the rubric, we're considering the different parts. So first it says presentation. So this says it has an MLA header. We'll talk about that in class. So don't worry if you do not have it right now. Then it says that the lab is typed with the exception of the graph. So I am going to ask that you type everything. If you type things, it should be in the Times font, please. It should be 12 point, and it should just have normal margins. So don't change the margins. They should be normal when you're looking at a word. So you might want to change this to times. You want to make sure it's 12 points. And then I would also double space your lab report. Okay, so everything should be double spaced. It makes it way easier to read and to offer feedback. So now, it also says that the title has to be specific to the experimental question. It should not be the same as the experimental question, but it should be a title related to the experimental question. Then it says each section has a header, so that would be that if you have a material section, a procedure, a graph, a conclusion, that each section is titled as such to be specific. Then if we look, we said that your materials list and your procedure were completed with your group. So that means that this should be the same materials for each group. Oops, my R got a little bit weird. So the same materials for each group. You will individually type the information, but it should be the same materials for each group. Okay? You have to make sure you have the quantities, you have to make sure that you have the sizes, you have to make sure that the names are specific and accurate, but it should be the same materials for each group. Just like if I made dinner with someone else, okay, if we made the same product, we should say that we use the same ingredients. Procedure. The procedure was made within groups, so this should be the same procedure. Oops, I'm getting all crazy with my wording here at the end of the day on a Friday. So the same procedure for each group. So that means that if I was in the group with 3 other people, that our procedures should be about the same. I'm going to add this, wording may differ. So that means that my words that I choose might be slightly different for the procedure than my partner's, yet the procedure itself should say that I'm doing the same things. Does that make sense? Okay. So it should be very similar, though I might expect some small wording differences. Then the graph. This is individually made. So you are responsible for making your graph. You are graphing the same information as the other people within your group, so it should look similar . It should look similar to the people in your group because you completed the lab with other people. It should not be a carbon copy of that person's lab or that person's graph, okay? So it should look similar, of course, because you have the same information. But please remember that it's up to you to decide that you're making the best graph. So I would just double check, make sure that you included all of these things, make sure that it's high quality, because I check to make sure that the craftsmanship is good on these graphs. So that means We added color, it's neat, it's drawn with a straight edge, and you are individually responsible for that, so make sure that you did that. Okay? Then your conclusion. Your conclusion needs to be 100% individual. Your conclusion should not be the same as anybody else's in any of the classes, period. So you made your own prediction, you performed the lab, you are analyzing the data, you are determining the significance of your results, and you are explaining what you learned about enzymes in our class. So there is no way that two people's conclusions would be identical, period. So people's writing is not identical. You have to do it on your own. Then, if we look, for our conclusion, some people are feeling confused about that. There's a list of questions here about what needs to be addressed within our conclusion. And then we will flip. Oh, I want to go right back really quickly. I'm sorry. So if you look at the bottom, it says that there are no noticeable spelling or grammar errors that distract from the meaning of the conclusion. Okay? So this means that I am not going to give you a B if you misspell one thing, okay? But you have to make sure that what you are saying makes sense. And even if you have a few little errors, we all know we have a bunch of people who speak English as their second or third language, and that's fine, okay? As long as you're communicating your ideas clearly, that is 100% fine. The only challenge would be that if we are not clearly communicating what it is that we need to communicate. And remember, we're going to revise. Remember that you can always ask me for some feedback before you submit your final copy as well. So, just do your best, and it has to be your work, okay? So it's got to be your work. Little spelling errors should be caught by things like spell check in Word anyway, so it shouldn't be a huge problem, right? As long as you're just vigilant. So then let's flip. We're looking at our conclusions. The bottom part here, I'm going to try and zoom in just a little bit. I'll bend down my camera here. Okay. We're looking again at these questions. So these are guiding questions for our conclusion. With each guiding question here, there are sentence starters. So when I do a lab conclusion, I feel like there are always people in different places when it comes to writing and when it comes to their confidence in doing an activity like this. So some people will just, look at the questions and then write, a page or two just off what they think is the most important, and they'll make sure they include the questions, and they'll be fine. They feel in ease in writing the conclusion. Other people feel a little bit more hesitant, and that's okay. So if you're feeling more hesitant, then I would start by sticking to this. So there's a question, something for you to think about, and then there's a sentence starter. So if we look, the first one says the learning target of this lab was. That was like, what were we supposed to be doing in this lab? Like, what was our goal? And this is on the front of the lab. It's also in your notebook. So we've been learning about proteins, remember? So our long-term learning target was to learn about the role of proteins in the body. And then this is our learning target for this specific lab. So we would try and summarize what the purpose of the lab was, just so that we're anchoring our ideas, okay, of what we're talking about. Then you'll go through and you'll just start each sentence this way. So if you feel stuck, remember, if you feel confident, then you can stop listening to me and you can just do your own thing. But if you feel stuck, then for the sentence starters, you'll start a sentence with each of these. Okay, so you'll start with the learning target of this lab was da da da. Okay, then my group's experimental question was, fill it in. Then my prediction was, and you state your prediction. Then you're going to share your data or results. This means you actually need to include your numbers, right? And, there's a lot of symbols, sorry, your numbers and observations. So you need to include those in your conclusion. Then you would write what they mean And then you're going to do a little summary of what enzymes are and the properties of enzymes in general that we learned from this lab and from other activities. So I want you to start this, okay? Not every lab goes according to plan, and not every lab gives us strong results. So that means that sometimes our results are not consistent with the actual properties of enzymes. So if that is the case, then that's okay. We don't change our data. Our data is what it is. But we might discuss in our conclusion, so we should include in our conclusion the sources of possible errors and why you think that your information is not consistent with the known properties of enzymes. So don't fret, but always discuss the possible sources of that difference and the possible sources of error. All right, so I'm going to ask you to write the conclusion, and it should be done for the next time that I see you. And not done, but it should be a rough draft. So for the rough draft, I do want it to be handwritten and double spaced if you can. I mean, if you choose to type it, that would be okay. But it needs to be physically printed so that we can pass it around and we can have people give you feedback. So when you come to class in the next class period, I need to physically see a rough draft of the conclusion. So it cannot be on the computer. It has to be on a piece of paper in the room. Okay. All right, so if you have any questions, please let me know. All right, thank you. Have a good week.